to another Tractorless Vineyard virtual wine tasting. This is about my fourth now. I'm slowly getting used to it. Slowly, very slowly. Now, guys, if you're joining us on Zoom, there's a little down the bottom, you'll see there's a little chat section. So you can click on that and ask any questions, and I will try and watch that at the same time as posting on them. And I think I spoke too soon. I just said I got everything up and working perfectly. Well, I take that back. My YouTube just cut out of me. So bear with me whilst we go there. All right. Here we go. Right, perfect. Now I'm up and running everywhere again. Right, guys. Well, welcome again to Tractorless Vineyard. Yeah, it's crazy times, isn't it? All these virtual tastings. It's been pretty exciting for us, really. I don't think I've ever had the opportunity to talk to so many people at the same time to tell them about our wines. So it's really great. We've got about 40 of us sitting here across all our channels at the moment watching us. So welcome, everyone. I hope you got your cheeses ready. Hope you got some meats ready. Once again, I didn't get anything ready myself because I've been running around gardening. I find in all this isolation, I think my wife's got a bit more time to check everything out in the garden. So we're all doing a bit more gardening work at the moment. So a little bit about Tractorless Vineyard. So we're located down Southern Highlands of New South Wales. We run our vineyard all biodynamically and organically. We then run sheep through the vineyard for the whole growing season, which means we use the tractor about 60% less, and that's where the name comes from. So we're quite a little sustainable label. I'm planning in the future, probably in the next couple of weeks, I want to go live and do some sparkling discussions and some sparkling sort of tastings virtually. I also want to take you guys all out to the vineyard and talk about our biodynamics a bit, because that's a big part of what we do, all the biodynamics. The more and more as we go through these times, and there's already a lot of research coming out of California with the effects of things like Roundup and glyphosate, and also that they're actually finding traces of them in wines. So all of these things are sort of part of the reason why we went biodynamic. I've been making wine now. I think last week I said I'd been making wine for 22 years, and someone emailed me and said, "Oh, when did you start?" And I actually calculated it out, and I've actually been making wine now for 32 years in the industry. So after 32 years, seeing what's being done, seeing how things taste, and I've definitely decided that the best way to do it is biodynamically. I don't want to be spraying anything on the vineyards that I wouldn't be happy to be walking around the vineyard in a shortened t-shirt and getting sprayed on myself. So that's probably one of the main reasons I went biodynamic. We tried it on a couple of blocks and the results were just amazing. And so I'm a complete convert now. One of the hardest things with biodynamics and organics has always been the controlling of the grass and the weeds underneath the vines. And so traditionally, well, I say traditionally, but post-industrial revolution, traditionally, most viticulture will herbicide and kill all the grass. So it's just the vines. And so one of the biggest challenges with organic and biodynamic is trying to manage that grass, because it can take the nutrients away from the vines. It can take the water away from the vines. And so that was part of the reason we introduced the sheep into the vineyard, just as some trial. And it took us, a good 3 or 4 years before we were able to hone down the system. They did eat a lot of grapes in that time. They did eat a lot of grapevines in that time. We tried things like we used electrical wires for a while. Just the fruit would be hanging here and the wires would just hang underneath. And that worked great until the electric went out. You'd be amazed at what 50 sheep can eat in a day when the electric went out. So it was amazing. So nowadays we use, they're called Hampshire Downs. So they're quite a rare meat sheep. they're a little bit shorter. They can still reach a little bit of the vines, but they're what you call grazers. So they'll look down and eat the grass, and they'll only start looking up and eating the fruit and the grapes. I mean, the fruit and the leaves if there's not enough grass there. So we rotate them through pretty quick, and they spread out quite well in the vineyard too. They're called roamers. And the third thing is that they are also a little bit shorter. So when we lift the vines a bit and the sheep are a bit shorter, they can only eat the first 2 leaves of the grapevine. And so that we might talk about that a bit later, but that helps us expose some of the UV light to the grapes themselves. So they really save their lives. Like they've taken what is a really labor intensive way of running a vineyard, which is biodynamics and organic, because normally the way to control the grass and the weeds underneath is with either a slasher or mulching or cultivating. So it's a lot of labor intensive stuff and stuff that is a little bit damaging to the soil structure. So to get the sheep in there, we really changed our lives. One of the other main reasons we got the sheep was because we're actually finding we were getting little vine moths in the grapes. And the Steiner philosophy, or the biodynamic philosophy, says that if you're getting insect problems in your crops or your farms, it means you don't have enough mammals on the land. And interestingly enough, those issues with the insects have majorly decreased since having the sheep there. And I think it's something to do with, I think they must interrupt their breeding cycle or their habitat somehow, because they keep the grass nice and short. Right, so let's get into the tasting. So first up today, we have our Sauvignon Blanc. Now I know, and I say this every week and I haven't fixed it yet, I know that the tasting notes and the little labels I send out don't have any vintages on them. So I'm going to give them to you as they go. So this is what the label looks like. That's our 2016 Sauvignon Blanc. And this is made in a Fumé style. So a Fumé style is traditionally the way the Bordeaux people made Sauvignon Blanc, and it's because it had a really matchsticky, flinty character to it. Now, New World winemakers such as myself, New Zealand, America, those sort of areas, when we take a Sauvignon Blanc and we ferment it in oak to try and replicate those sort of real flinty, matte sticky characters, we call it a Fumé style Sauv Blanc. And I love them because I find that, Sauv Blanc, for me, is just a bit too much fruit bang in your face. Like I find them a bit overbearing sometimes. And I feel that sometimes they're all just about fruit. And I love making a Fumé style just because they're a little bit more subtle, a little bit more mellowed, a little bit more chilled out. I kind of like to think I'm a little bit chilled out, so it suits my personality a bit. So Fumé Blanc, or Fumé Sauvignon Blanc, is our first one we're going to get a look at. The other thing we do with this, we do a double pick. So we pick half of the grapes at around about 10 Baumé. Now, when I say Baumé, that's a sugar way of measuring the sugar. You may have seen winemakers, they put that hydrometer. It's like a little glass thing, and you float it in the juice, and it tells you the sugar level. Now, there's all different ways of measuring sugar, or all different units. Winemakers usually use a measurement called Baumé, and that's because 1 Baumé pretty much converts to 1% alcohol. So when I talk about Baumé, I'm talking, it will end up being 1% alcohol. So we harvest our Sauvignon Blanc at about 10 Baumé, half of it, and that gives you that really, and you can smell it, that really nice green, lantana-y sort of character in the wine. We then harvest the second half of it, bit closer to 12% or 12 Baumé, and so that gives you that more tropical and passion fruit sort of characters in the wine. And you'll see when you taste it, you definitely see both those sides of the spectrum. And once again, I love the fact that I'm doing these tastings now at 4:30 and not earlier in the morning, because now I can enjoy a glass of the oil. So what I love about that is that you get that really nice clean acid, then it moves on in the palate to that really soft sort of passion fruit and tropical character, and then you just get these nice subtle oaky characters hanging around, and it's just all really mellow and chilled out style of Sauvignon Blanc. And that's definitely my sort of style of winemaking. Pretty much all our wines are about how I want to drink them. I hope that other people like the way I make them, but you know, I have very specific ways I like to do something, or I like the taste of something, and that's why we've made them like this. And one of the things you will notice as we go through our wines is that they're all very different. So we don't just have, like, you know, some places like all their whites are quite similar, their reds are quite similar, because of every single one I make is made for a really specific reason in a really specific style, and so they're quite different. So that's our Sauvignon Blanc done in a Fumé style. Next is our Pinot Grigio. So everyone always this region, Southern Highlands down here, really good for Pinot Gris and Grigio. It probably here in King Valley personally would be my pick for Australian Gris and Grigio. Everyone always asks me what's the difference between a Gris and a Grigio. So we made the difference. So there's our Pinot Grigio label. Again, the sustainable series. So you'll see, we'll talk about it a bit later anyway. We do have 2 series wines, sustainable and creators. So this is again Pinot Grigio off our sustainable series. Now, Pinot Grigio and Gris are both made from the same grape variety, which is the Pinot Gris variety. But Pinot Grigio is the Italian way of making it, and Pinot Gris is the French way of making it. So the philosophy, if you're an Italian winemaker, your philosophy is it's all about the food. So if you think about Italy, there's a lot of maritime areas, a lot of seafood down there. It's a bit warmer down south there, and so they're trying to create a more crisp, lively, zippy style of wine to go with the food. So the Italians, good way to remember, Italians always in a hurry, so they're the first people to harvest the fruit. So they harvest it nice and early. They harvest it around about that 11.5 to 12% alcohol. So lower alcohol means less sugar in the wine when it's harvested. It also means that there's a little bit more acid, so you get that really crisp character to it. So they are harvested a lot earlier, and as you'll see, if you drink a lot of Pinot Gris, normally it's a bronzy color, and we'll talk about that in a sec, but you don't get that color in Pinot Grigio. Now, Pinot Grigio also, the Italians are not afraid of using oxygen in their ferments at all. So we replicate that when I replicate that when I make it at the winery, where I actually bubble oxygen through the juice to make it go brown before I ferment it. And that really helps give me that nice steely palate, and that really, and you can smell it. It's like a real green apple character to the wine. And this is actually one of my favorite wines. And if you thought ahead, unlike me, and got some of those, there's these beautiful South Coast oysters that they do down there in the Shoalhaven. They're just the little ones, and they're really sweet. And those oysters matched with this Pinot Grigio. It's one of my favorite matches. And you'll see you get that beautiful green apple, crisp, sort of lively, steely palate to it. And that's what a Pinot Grigio should be looking like. So Pinot Grigio, Italian, lower alcohol, usually 11.5 to 12, sometimes 12.5, but then you're pushing into the Gris barrier. You always get that really nice, lively acid. It's more of a summery, I guess, maritime sort of style of wine. Now, if we move on to our Pinot Gris, so Pinot Gris is the French way of making it. So both of these wines that you're trying now, Grigio and Gris, come from exact same vineyard, exact same block. One is following those Italian early picking, oxygenated ferments, cool ferments, trying to create that Grigio style. And this one is trying to create a French style, which is a Gris style. So the French, their philosophy on winemaking is more about the wine itself. And so they're trying to create a big, soft, round, voluptuous style of wine. They're less concerned with matching it with food, although it does match with food, and there's some great food matches. When they're making the wine, that's not the thing that's in their head. Their thing that's in their head is kind of create this wine that stands by itself. So to do that, the French harvest it a lot later. So the first thing that you'll notice when you put it in your glass, and if some of you got the see-through bottles, you'll see it in the bottle already. But the first thing you'll notice is the color. The color is quite different. It's got more of this bronzy, maybe little tinge of pink color to it. And that's because of the ripeness level. So Pinot Gris as a variety, Gris means grey, and they do actually look grey on the grapevine as they get riper. And they actually get a little bit of a pinky color to them the riper they get. And so when you make a Pinot Gris, which is the French style, we're harvesting at around about that 13 to 14 Beaumet. So 13 to 14% alcohol is a traditional Pinot Gris French style alcohol level. And when you're getting up there, you're starting to get that nice sort of bronzy color to it. Now, the French, so they harvest it a lot later. So it's usually about 2 or 3 weeks later. The French are also super afraid of oxygen. So there's no oxygen in the ferment. Everything's done under carbon dioxide cover. They probably ferment it a little bit warmer. And sometimes you can use oak. I don't use oak in ours, but you'll definitely see by the legs on the wine. I don't know if you can pick it up on the camera, but you'll definitely see there's a lot of legs on the wine. That means that there's more volatiles and more alcohol in that. And when you taste it, or even when you smell it, you can smell the difference. Instead of those really crisp sort of green apple characters, you're getting more fleshy Bella Bosch pear sort of character to it. It's amazing how different those two wines are. So that's, same vineyard, same block, just really different winemaking styles. And what I really love about doing that and showing people, and it's one of my favorite ones to show them in the cellar door when we were still tasting live, not virtually, is to show these two wines, because it's a really good example of what a winemaker can do on a style of wine. So, we have those base flavors in the grapes, but you can see how different those two wines are when we follow different techniques. Now, you can also imagine, so we've got our Pinot Grigio at this end of the scale, and then we've got our Pinot Gris, sort of right at the other end. I'd probably put my hands further apart normally, but I can't fit them on the camera. So, you've got your two ends of the spectrum there from Grigio to Gris, and then you've got all the variations in between. So when I made these wines, I really tried to stick to a really traditional sort of Grigio style and a really traditional Gris style to highlight the differences. But you can imagine there's all those styles in between, and somewhere in the middle, around about that 12.5% alcohol mark, we get lost into what's green Grigio. The other really difficult thing in Australia is that it's not defined. So label law doesn't define a Gris or a Grigio, which means if you walk into a bottle shop and buy a Gris or Grigio, it's kind of a lucky dip. And I've worked for big companies where we've actually made like probably closer to a Pinot Gris than a Grigio, put it into bottle, and it actually gets labeled differently according to the marketing people's how they think it's going to sell. And so it makes it very difficult if you're into a certain style and going into a bottle shop to try and find that style. And, even if you do find it, it's not necessarily always going to be the same. It is changing though. In the wine show, there's a judging segment now for Grigio and one for Gris. So previously it was all grouped in together, and now because it's separate. So if I was to say put that Gris in a Grigio class, even though it's a beautiful Gris, it would get 0 marks because it's not a Grigio. And so that's the first part of it becoming label law. So Gris and Grigio. And the other funny thing about this is, quite often I'll have couples coming in, and one always likes one and one always likes the other. So it's a great polarizing wine as well. So it's a Pinot Gris. Next, we're going to move on to Chardonnay. So again, our sustainable series Chardonnay. There's a label there, and 2016. Sorry, I forgot the Grigio and Gris 18. Yeah, yeah. So Chardonnay 2016. I like to age the Chardonnay a little bit longer than the other whites. I've found over about 5 years or 6 years of making wines in the Highlands, and I used to do a lot of contract winemaking. I found that a lot of my clients were releasing Chardonnay, and they're releasing their new Chardonnay and moving on to their new Chardonnay when their old Chardonnay was tasting the best, and it was around about that 12 to 18 month mark. And I just think after bottling the wines, you've heard this, or you may have heard this term they talk about called bottle shock. It's 100% exists. We still to this day, despite lots of money being punched into the industry to research it, we really don't know why it does it. But every winemaker will tell you 100% it definitely goes through bottle shock, and you lose all that fruit flavor for a while. And particularly this region, I just find you need a good 18 months in bottle before that fruit flavor comes back out again. Now Chardonnay is really interesting in Australia. We went through that evolution, in the sort of early 70s and 80s, where it was all about oak. And then we went to sort of late 90s, 2000s, where it was all unoaked. And now we're finding a nice balance between bit of oak, bit of, fruit character, and just a nice balance. And I think for me, the key to Chardonnay is balance. And as a winemaker, Chardonnay is a really fun variety to make wine with because it's almost like a blank canvas. So things like Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Gris, the fruit characters of those wines are really strong and robust, and so they can overpower some of the winemaking techniques. With Chardonnay, although the fruit's characters are really strong, the influence of the winemaker can be seen like really well. So it's from a winemaker's point of view, I just find that it's a great wine to make. You can really see a winemaker's personality in the Chardonnay because it is, as I said, a blank canvas, and you can really see all the things that go on. So our Chardonnay, see a lot of that fresh grapefruit characters and citrus characters, but you also get that nice little bit of oak, but not over oaked, and a little bit of that buttery character. So that buttery character we get in Chardonnays, often it comes from a secondary ferment. So the first ferment we do ferments the sugar into alcohol using a yeast, and probably the most important ferment. The second ferment that wines go through, not all wines, our Chardonnay does, all our Weds do, sometimes a little bit the Pinot Gris, depending on the season, but usually not. So the secondary ferment is a bacterial ferment, and it converts the malic acid, which is the same acid you find in an apple, so a really crisp acid, and it converts it to lactic acid, which is the same acid that you find in milk. So it's a softer acid. So it's a way of softening out the wine and rounding out the wine. Now, part of that process is that you a byproduct of that fermentation is these real buttery sort of flavors and they're very obvious in Chardonnay because you don't have the red wine flavors to overcover them. And I think it would have been 80s sometime, one of the wine writers said, "Oh God, I'm so sick of these like buttery Chardonnays." And so the companies that make the bacteria started selecting against this buttery flavor. So nowadays, when I go to buy these buttery Chardonnays or buy these buttery bacterias, I actually can't find them. So all the bacterias I can buy commercially now predominantly selected against that buttery byproduct. So I managed to find an heirloom variety, and we use 5% of our barrels with that bacteria, and the other 95%, or five is that bacteria, 5 is wild, and the other 90% is the mainstream bacteria, which just gives you the acid conversion without the butteriness. And you'll see when you taste that buttery flavor is really evident in that wine. Not overpowering, but you can definitely see it. And that's only 5%. So you can imagine in the 80s when they were using 100% of that bacteria, why this wine writer said, "Oh, they're just too buttery," because it would just overpower that wine. Chardonnay, really interesting variety too, because no matter you know, so many people come into the cellar door and like, oh, I'm not really a Chardonnay drinker, and you know, it's kind of out of fashion a bit, and la la la. But it's still our biggest selling white variety in the cellar door, and probably the biggest selling white variety in Australia year after year. So it doesn't matter if it's in fashion or not in fashion. We are all closet Chardonnay drinkers. If you have organised yourself well enough and you've got a nice cheese platter in front of you, if you've got a soft cheese there, or and in particular a really soft sort of buttery style cheese like a fromage dauphinois or something like that, that and this Chardonnay is a beautiful match. And I just find that it really, that buttery cheese brings out the buttery flavor in the Chardonnay, and they blend with the cheese a bit, so it makes all the fruit characters and of the Chardonnay stand out a bit, because it kind of melds them with the cheese, and also makes the cheese feel taste a lot more buttery as well. It's something that I'm working on with some friends of ours, how to do a virtual tasting like this with food, because it's a whole new experience when you start going food and wine. You probably definitely need a much longer time period of session to do food and wine matching. So that's our Chardonnay. Next is our rosé. So the first thing you'll see with our rosé, and again, sustainable series label, the first thing you'll see with our rosé is these cute little bottles. So the idea, these are 500 ml bottles, and the idea is two people can drink this bottle over lunchtime and both under the limit. Unfortunately, I can't get them anymore. So this is our 2018. So every vintage onwards will be in the 750 ml bottles. We're not going to have another rosé vintage until 2021 next year. So we didn't get any grapes this year because of the fires. So 2021 will be our next vintages for a lot of our wines. The other thing you'll notice is this is quite a dark color. So dark rosés at the moment are not trendy. I've never been a person to follow trend. And so I'm a massive, massive fan of texture in my wines. And you'll probably notice that as you go through them. I like to be able to taste the wines. I like to be able to smell the wines, but I also like to be able to really feel the wines. And so to get that texture in our rosé, I need to leave it with the skins a bit longer. So a lot of people don't realize if I take a red grape and I squeeze it, the pulp and the juice inside is actually white. So to make a red wine, I actually have to ferment it with the skins to extract that color. To make a white wine, a rosé wine, I leave it with the skins for a certain period of time. So when I'm making this, I actually leave it with the skins until I start getting a nice bit of textural mouthfeel, and that's when I press it off. So it's around about that 10-hour mark, and that's why it's so dark, because we've extracted a lot more color. Normally, if I was trying to make those nice like Provence style rosés, I'd be pressing it off after about maybe an hour, if that at all. And they give you those beautiful, nice, fresh styles. I find you get a lot less texture. The ones that I prefer of those type are they go through a process where there's a lot more batonnage done to them. So batonnage is a process where you mix the wine with the dead yeast for a period of time, and as that yeast breaks down, it releases flavors and textures into the wine. So if I was going to make a Provence style, and maybe I will next year, I'm not sure, I might mix it up a bit, do a couple of rosés, then that's how I'd get the texture in. But for this one, to get that texture in, I leave it with the skins a lot longer, and so as a result, it's a darker rosé. It's 100% Pinot Noir rosé, so you get that really nice strawberry characters. And this is for me, this is a great summertime wine. Right now, a lot of you can't see. I might be able to on Instagram anyway, if anyone's watching me. There you go. You can see the view that I'm looking out for. That's my backyard. And so I'm usually sitting on this deck and enjoying a nice cheese platter or something. And this rosé is a perfect match in the summer, even spring, even now. You know, it's not too cold yet. It's a perfect match for that sort of cheese platter and charcuterie board. Beautiful fresh strawberries from that from the Pinot Noir, and then you get that nice bit of texture and that nice creaminess. So I do still put this through a batonnage process, but not as long as I would if I didn't leave with the skins. And I do it for the purpose of giving that creaminess to it, and that's one of the characters you can get from the dead yeast, is that nice creaminess. So that's our rosé. So we're on to reds now. So look, I don't know where you guys are watching us from, but for me, starting to get a bit cool down here in the Highlands, starting to get those nice chilly nights and fresh mornings. So we're starting to move into red time of year. Next, our first red we're going to look at is the Lost Flock. So you'll see the label change here. This is our Creators Series label. So we've got two series, the Sustainable Series, which is the label with the tractor. So the Sustainable Series is 100% off our biodynamic vineyards, and the Creators Series is not 100% off our biodynamic vineyards. So there's some wines that things like Shiraz and Cabernet, it's way too cold here in the Highlands to ripen the Shiraz and the Cabernet. And so we work closely with some growers in Hilltops, and that's where we get the Shiraz and Cabernet from. Things like our Lost Flock, we use some varieties locally, some not locally, some from our vineyards that haven't converted or are not biodynamic yet. And so we wanted to really clearly define what was off our biodynamic blocks and what wasn't. So the Sustainables off our biodynamic blocks, Creators is not. So first one, we're going to try the Lost Flock. So I was sitting in front of the fire, drinking a nice Barossa Red, which I love. I love a good Barossa Red. I find them sometimes they're a little bit heavy, so I can only have a glass or two before I've had enough. And I wanted to make something that, had those beautiful velvety tannins and chocolate characters and that really nice long lingering raspberry aftertaste. And so I came up with a blend which is called the Lost Flock. It's essentially a GSM, so it's essentially Grenache, Shiraz, Mourvedre, but it also has a bit of Merlot and Petit Verdot in it as well. So they're the 5 varieties. And this is just my sit in front of the fire, drink a bottle of red wine. It's my easy, everyday drinking wine. And it's probably the wine I take out the most if I'm going to a dinner party or something. And the reason is that, people are Shiraz drinkers or Cabernet drinkers or Merlot drinkers. And I just find that, all of those people find a character in this wine that they like. And so it's, good to take to dinner parties or easier to take to dinner parties and that sort of thing. So we call it Lost Flock because in the winery, I stack the barrels according to their variety. And so I had all these stacks of barrels all over the winery, and it reminded me of the sheep. So I mentioned before we run the Hampshire Downs in the vineyard, and they're roaming sheep. And what that means is they don't flock. So in the vineyard, we don't end up with those sheep camps, and we don't end up with those, we very rarely end up with the sheep tracks all over the vineyard. We just don't get them because the sheep are roaming. So if you walk into the vineyard, the sheep are spread across the whole vineyard. Great for compaction and management of the vineyard. Nightmare when I'm trying to shear the sheep. There's always 2 that I miss. I have no idea why or where they hide. It takes me days and days to round them all up, and I always miss 2. But because the vineyards are all over because the barrels are all over the winery and the sheep all over the vineyard, it kind of reminded me of the sheep, and that's why we call this the Lost Flock. So this is my everyday drinking red. Purely designed so I can drink the bottle in front of the fire. Not that I'm telling anyone to drink a bottle in front of the fire, but that's why I designed this wine. It's nice, soft red. There's nice velvety tannins, and then that lingering raspberry aftertaste that comes from the Grenache. Yum. So up next, so Pinot Noir, and you'll notice, normally you do Pinot Noir first because they're those light, delicate styles. And, a lot of Australian and Southern Highlands and New Zealand wines are made in that New new age way of making Pinot Noir, and they're just delicate and beautiful, and they just remind me of ballerinas. You know, they're so complex and interesting, quite delicate on the palate. So this Pinot Noir of ours is not that style. This is a very old school, funky Burgundian style. Heaps of whole bunches, heaps of stems. So it's a really big, funky style. I mean, when I put this into barrel and then for about 18 months in barrel and then into bottle, when it first goes into bottle, you can't drink it. It's like bitter and resiny and like, well, it doesn't taste good at all. And it's that real traditional Burgundian way of making wine. And you leave it in bottle. It takes about 4 years. And then about that year 2 mark, all the fruit flavor all of a sudden comes out in that wine, still a bit better. And then you wait for those tannins to complex out and soften out. And then around about that year 3 to 4 mark, you end up with this really delicate, well, not delicate, this really big, but complex, interesting, funky Pinot Noir. This is my style of Pinot. I released this. It's actually settled down now, but when I first released it, it was at the 3-year mark, and it still had a little hint of that bitterness on the back palate. I drink a lot of coffee, and I actually quite like that texture in the mouth, so I was happy to release it then. The French would probably say to wait another year until it softens out. So it's kind of last time I tasted it last weekend for our virtual tasting, that bitterness had gone, and so it's probably, you know, the French would say it's ready to go. I just love this one. You know, Pinot's like the Chardonnay, I guess, of reds, where because the flavors of the fruit aren't so strong, you know, the winemaking can really influence those flavors, and you can really see what the winemaker does in the wine. I love these funky styles. I mean, it's a style that's not done much now because 96% of wines are drunk within 24 hours of them being purchased. And so we don't age wines anymore. And this style is designed to age. It will just age and age and age. And you're just going to get those beautiful cigar boxy forest floor characters in this wine the older it gets. And it's something that I was introduced to, luckily, at uni, these old wines. And it's something I want to show people because I feel that we in society anyway, we don't see it as often as we should because we don't age wine. So a lot of the wines that I make to age, we actually release them, yes, when they're ready, but now as we get down to the last sort of like 20 cases of a wine, I'll hold them back just for our wine club members, just to do a museum reserve. And I am umming and ahhing about whether I've got enough wines ready to do a virtual tasting of our museum wines, but we'll just see how long we're in lockdown for. So Pinot Noir, whole bunch, about 20%, lots of stems, really big funky style. And you'll see that's a big, bold, funky Pinot. Not a light, delicate style. It's just going to age and age and age. That's unfiltered. We don't filter the Pinot. So if sometimes you get tiny little hint of sediment in the bottle, but you know, this is one of my favorite wines because it's a wine where I really haven't let commercial and marketing and that's things influence at me at all. So, you know, a lot of our whites, I would like to do unfiltered, and I would like to do uncold stabilized, but I don't think we all, flavor-wise, we can all handle it. But at the moment, you know, our Gris, I did do a light cold stability, so you just get a little bit of sediment sometimes in the bottle, but in the whites, people really don't like it yet. And so I haven't done too much of that, but I'm a, you know, you will see over time that our wines will definitely start tracking a bit more towards that natural orange wine styles of winemaking a lot more. I released a pet this year, so that was a big natural wine, and I had hoped to do a orange wine in 2020, but we didn't get any grapes. So look forward to those sort of more funky styles. And that's what I like about this Pinot, because I haven't filtered it or anything. And so it sort of stayed in that more traditional way of making wine. And I love that style, big and funky. And cigar boxy and that beautiful Pinot. And that's all. And again, I don't think I showed you the label of that one. So the Pinot, that's off our sustainable blocks as well. So Pinot is probably one of the few red varieties we can get ripe in the Highlands because we're quite cold. People don't really realise how cold we are in the Highlands. Quite often we will actually harvest at the same time or later than Tasmania. So we're really cold here. Next is our Shiraz. And our Shiraz, so Creators Series Shiraz 2015. So that Pinot was 2015 as well. The Shiraz, this is probably the most Australian wine that I make. Most of the other winemaking techniques I follow probably more European techniques and more European styles. Australia is famous for Shiraz, and my winemaking career started with Clonakilla in Canberra, and so Shiraz always is sort of embedded in my heart somewhere, and Cool Climate Shiraz in particular. I love the delicacy, I love the spice element to it, and just there's a really nice sort of structural component in the palate that I love. And so I had to make a Cool Climate Shiraz, and I had to make it a really traditional Australian, what we'd expect for a Cool Climate Shiraz. So that's why this is the most Australian wine I make. It's destemmed, probably spends about 3 weeks in ferment with no stems, pressed off into barrel for 12 to 18 months and then into bottle. And then again, we probably let most of our reds spend at least 18 months in bottle before we release them. But, when you taste a Cool Climate Shiraz, you just get that really nice sort of round plum and chocolate characters and a little hint of sort of white pepper and spice and cinnamon. And that's what you get in this. And this is, just that typical Cool Climate Shiraz. So if you're into Cool Climate Shirazes, this is what you'd probably be expecting. And I love that wine, and just reminds me of starting my winemaking career with some great people. And one of the best things about winemaking is it is a very small community, and the winemakers, all the winemakers I've met, friendly guys, really happy to invite you in and show you things. And so, so many of my memories are taste related. And so, music and taste and experiences like that, it's just amazing. And this always brings back great memories of starting my winemaking. Someone asked that, so the Shiraz is a 2015 Shiraz, that one. So yes, I'm sorry I didn't put all the years on the tasting notes. Next, we're doing our Cabernet. So you'll notice a different label. So this is actually the old labels we had, and we've now changed them all over to these nice ones with the little image on them. So Cabernet, I love a really old aged Cabernet. And one of the problems when you're aging a wine, or two of the problems, one of them is the older the wine gets, the less fruit characters you get, but then the more savory characters you get. So a wine's tasting its best when you get that nice balance of, a little bit of fruit and freshness there, but then you get these nice savory characters. And when I say tasting the best, that's for me. So something that I do always say in the cellar door is, don't let someone tell you what's good and what's not. What is good is what you like. And me as a winemaker, my aim is to make something that you like to drink. My aim isn't to make something that's going to win all these awards or anything. And we actually don't enter a lot of our wines in any awards. I don't want other people to tell you what you like. I want you to decide what you like. So when I say drinking its best, that's for me. So I like a little bit of that fresh fruit character, but a lot of those aged savory characters, soy sauce, sort of funky characters in my Cabernet. And so the problem when you're doing that, the older wines get you losing that fruit. The other thing is that wines, when they get really old, they go through a process they called cracking up. And if you've ever been lucky enough and lucky in inverted commas, because usually it means a wine's had it when it's cracked up, but it is the best description for a wine that is past its prime and it's cracked up is, when you put a wine in your mouth, it's sort of round and full and fills up the whole mouth. If the wine's cracked up, it's got like this gap through the middle of the tongue in a crack form that literally has no flavor or anything. And that means it's cracked up. And that's related to the tannins. So, when you get a young Cabernet and you get those sort of like sharpy, edgy, a little bit chalky tannins. So those tannins are short chains. Now, as you age that bottle of wine, those short chain tannins join together into a long chain tannin. And a long chain tannin is soft and velvety. And when I say tannins, I'm talking about that sort of grippiness you get on your tongue. Like when you eat a banana, that furry character. So you can imagine if I say start with 100 short tannins in a bottle and then they join together into a long tannin, I've gone from 100 tannins to 50. And then as they join together into a longer tannins, I've gone from like 50 tannins to 25. And eventually I run out of tannins in that wine to hold the structure together. And that's when a wine cracks up. And so the French, and in Bordeaux, they created a style called post-ferment maceration, or technique, I should say. And it's designed to make wines that will age really well. And so when we make a red wine, we ferment it usually for about 3 or 4 weeks. Sometimes we leave it on the skins after the ferment for a few weeks, and that's called post-ferment maceration. But the French in Bordeaux, they leave it with the skins for months and months and months and months. So this Cabernet actually spends 18 months with the skins before we press it off and it goes to barrel. It then spends another 12 to 18 months in barrel before it goes into bottle, and then another 12 to 18 months in bottle before we release it. So it's a long winemaking process. And it does a few things. One is it creates a wine that's like super, super, super fruity. And when you're making this wine, you would never, ever think in a million years it's going to create a fruity wine, because you've got all those stems and seeds and skins in there. When you taste it, you can't taste any of the fruit. You never see any fruity characters to it. And to be honest, I've never done this style before. I've heard about it. I've been interested in it. I've always wanted to do it. And everyone I've talked to has probably the most they've ever done it is about the 3-month mark. And I find that after doing this now for 18 months, the 3-month mark is the mark where you would go, oh, yeah, it's starting to get a fair bit of that tannin out, starting to get a little bit bitter. Let's get it off the skins. But if you persist and have faith and leave it longer, you go through a few months of it tasting like awful, and you honestly, you go in the vineyard, into the wine, and you're like, oh my God, what have I done? I have totally destroyed this wine. And then eventually it comes through that, and all the tannins and the bitternesses start complexing out, and you actually end up a wine at the end that still has no fruit, but is actually quite soft and not bitter. So through the whole process, never see the fruit. In the barrels, 12 to 18 months, you never see the fruit. Put it into bottle, don't really see the fruit. 18 months, bang, all this fruit characters comes out of the wine. It's just unbelievable. It's just been hiding there or something. I don't know why it's just there, and it just comes out. And 18 months after bottling, when I opened a bottle of wine, I actually didn't like this wine because it was way too fruity for me. And I can see now why Bordeaux created this technique, because it does. It creates this wine that's super fruity. And now, 2015, this wine is. Now the fruit levels for me are still really up there, and you get that really nice cassis, capsicum, tomato leaf character that you know, really typical cool climate Shiraz sort of characters. They're only just now for me at a level that I quite like it. Previously I found it too fruity for me, but I can see why, because this is just gonna, 10, 20 years, you're still going to be seeing fruit in that. And so it's going to balance nicely those savory characters. So the other thing that happens in this technique called post-ferment maceration is because it's in this big tank before the skins and stems and stuff, there's so many of these short chain tannins floating around in that tank that it forces them together into those long chain, more velvety tannins when it's in tank. And so when you put it into bottle, you're starting the bottling process with, say, 100 of those long chain tannins rather than 100 of those short chain tannins. So it means that your wine's going to last longer before it cracks up. Now, for me, I'm loving this wine at the moment. You know, when you smell that, for a 5-year Cabernet, there's so much fruit still in that real cassis capsaicin character, and you smell it and you expect to get those real chalky tannins, but you don't. You get a really soft, velvety tannin, and that's exactly what this technique's meant to do. I personally are going to be drinking that wine probably in 5 years' time, maybe 10. It is, if it was under cork, maybe 5. I actually think that it's aging so well, and I really love an old Cabernet that I think it's going to be a bit more time before I start drinking a lot of that in my cellar. So that's our post-Mac Cabernet Sauvignon. It's a technique. It's done a little bit in Australia. When I asked around to some of the old school winemakers about how long they've done it and what trying to find out information about what it tastes like in the future and that sort of thing, there actually wasn't that much around. The longest I could find was about 2 or 3 months. So no one had done it to 18 months before. Since doing this and since showing some of these old winemakers, I know a couple of them have sort of come out of retirement a bit to just do their own little batch to try it, because I'm really, really excited to taste that wine in like 20 years' time, just to see how it's aged. Because the thing is, you know, in France, they've had that age, and so we can say, yep, that technique with the French Bordeaux fruit works amazingly well, and they create these beautiful wines that age really well. Now, I've not tasted, or I don't know anyone that's tried it to this level in Australia, and so we're not going to know whether the fruit here is the same as there, and we're not going to know the actual result of this until another 20 or 30 years, or maybe more. And so I'll come back to you then. We'll find out how good it is. But it's doing what it's meant to do, and it's doing what I expect it to. So I'm pretty excited about that at the moment. So we've only got one more. So this is 8,000 vintages. So the oldest record of winemaking in the world comes from a country called Georgia in Eastern Europe, and it's dated 6,000 BC, so 3,000 years before Egypt. And if you're into history, it's a little bit technical, but there is a book called Ancient Wine that's worth reading, and it talks about how they proved the oldest record of winemaking in the world. And effectively, as they developed pottery and they could start holding liquid in a container, as they developed pottery, we developed wine and winemaking. And what they did, there's this little town just to the north of Tbilisi, and they found these pottery shards, and these pottery shards had tartaric acid on them. Now, the only fruit in the world that makes tartaric acid is grapes, and so they knew that grapes had been stored in these pottery shards. They also found near the pottery shards some grape seeds that were fat and round. Now, if I take a wild grapevine and I propagate it and cultivate it, the grape seeds go from long and skinny and they become fat and round. And so they had fat round grape seeds and pottery shards with tartaric acid. And so they've decided that's the first tangible evidence of winemaking in the world. And that's 6,000 BC. Now, there is a statue in Georgia of a guy drinking out of a sheep horn. And that's the traditional way they drink wine in Georgia is through a sheep horn. And so there's anecdotal evidence that it may be older winemaking, because this statue is dated 10,000 BC, but they cannot prove that he's drinking wine out of the sheep horn. And so the oldest record they can actually tangibly prove is 6,000 BC. So at the moment, as I understand, that's where it sits, the oldest record of winemaking in the world from a country, Georgia, in Eastern Europe. I was lucky enough to spend 7 years consulting in Georgia, and it is awesome country, awesome people. The history of wine, like wine, is so embedded in the entire culture. It's not funny, and they do so many different winemaking techniques, and yeah, really interesting place to work. So this is my homage to the history of wine. So the Georgians do a famous style called Kinsmorelli, and this is my Australian version of Kinsmorelli. Very famous over in Eastern Europe. I think in 2002 it was when I was there, or early 2000s anyway. And Russia and Georgia had that little battle, and the Russians had banned all imports from Georgia, and it was still our biggest market. And we used to smuggle Kinsmorelli across the borders on school buses. That's how famous it is over there. So really famous style. We don't call it Kinsmorelli because it's not a true Kinsmorelli. It's not from the Kinsmorelli region, and so it's not true to Kinsmorelli. It is true to style though. So the flavors and the characters, and we get a lot of Eastern Europeans that buy it, and they're like, yeah, this is Kinsmorelli. I reckon this is a really good match for that, that American style barbecue, that really smoky style barbecue. The real fruity characters of this 8000 really cuts through those smoky characters. A great match for a smoky barbecue, or a really mature cheddar, or a bitter chocolate, really dark bitter chocolate. It's quite a unique style. You probably wouldn't have tried, unless you've been lucky enough to try some Kinsmorelli. You wouldn't really have tried anything like this before. It's got hints of, I guess, a little bit port-like, because you get that, or ruby port, I guess. You get that real berries and fruit character to it, and you get that nice complexity, but you don't get that high alcohol either. So the alcohol in that, from memory, this one is 12%. I think to call it Kinsmorelli, traditionally it has to be a minimum of 10%, and that has to be natural alcohol. You can't add sugar, you can't add alcohol. So that's the natural way of making it. I'm actually in the process of trying to track down, not trying to track down, trying to import. They're called queries. So you've probably all seen amphoras. So amphoras are those Italian pottery urns, or Greek pottery urns that they make wine in. So query, which predates those from Georgia, is their traditional vessel for making wine, and they're a little bit bigger, and they're actually buried under the ground. And so I would love to get one of those and make a traditional Kinsmorelli style in a query. And I'd also love to make a traditional Cazzetelli, which is a white grape variety over there that they ferment with the skins on it, so an orange style. And so I'd love to make a traditional Cazzetelli in a query as well. So that's our Trackless Vineyard 8000 vintages. So guys, that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed everything. I hope you learned something. I love doing these. I'm getting really sick of pouring all our wines into little bottles. But I'm glad we can, it's something, as a winemaker, it's something I do enjoy every week, is the going out into the cellar door and talking about the wines, and, hearing back from people and getting the questions. And, I love your comments. I love the photos I get sent afterwards. We do the private sessions as well, which I love. And so it's great to see people jumping on those now as well, because I really hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please just keep shooting them through for a while. I will probably turn off my sound and video if I do it properly. I hope I do it properly. I'm not wandering around with a shirt off or something. But keep the chat going, just in case anyone has any questions. I will actually, I might do it now whilst I'm talking to you, is I'll post up some links. I'd love you guys to follow us on YouTube and Instagram and those sort of things. I do plan to, in the future, I want to do a sparkling session. Unfortunately, I can't put our sparkling wines into little bottles. So I'm just trying to work out the logistics of a sparkling session, because we do it all method traditional. And I spent a year working with Shandon and a year working with Ed Carr from Maris, with Yarraburn, just to get my head around some techniques of sparkling wine, because this region in the Highlands is a really good region for sparkling wines. So I want to walk through and show some people about sparkling wines and how we do it and the differences between it. So I love you guys to follow what we do for when we do that. As I mentioned before, I want to go out into the vineyard at some stage and show you guys about what we do in the vineyard and some of the things there. So lots of things planned. All, of course, depends on how long we're going to be locked down for and how long we're going to do the virtual. But we're starting to get a lot of interest in our wines and things over in America. And so I'm thinking about continuing the virtual stuff anyway. Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Museum. I haven't been into the, someone just said the museum tasting sounds great. Estelle, I 100% agree, especially because of the whole shutdown. I've been running around doing all these things, and I haven't been into the cellar now for like almost a month or two. And there's some great old wines there, but I'm really excited to taste. So the hard thing about the museum stuff is they're a bit more susceptible to oxidizing if we're re-pouring them. So I'm still working through that, but it's definitely something on the future. I also posted up some links to our shop. Would love you guys to use your vouchers, log on there. Sorry, it's a bit confusing that it's not our shop. It's through the Vincenia Bottle Shop, but that's because we're not. Oh, I'm kind of techno savvy now that I've got all these video things going, but I don't have the online shop going. Also, if you're in the Highlands or the Shire or down near Jervis Bay, that area, I say, guys, check out a link. It's called the Mill Barrel. Actually, I'm going to put it right up now. The Mill Barrel. Now these guys are a farmers market that I used to attend every Wednesday, and they've jumped and made it all virtual, and they're shipping to a lot of areas around the Southern Highlands and the Shire, or you can do a click and collect down the South Coast and around down there. There's been a lot of local producers here. We rely on these markets, and they've all of a sudden all gone, and these guys have made a great virtual market there. And so if you in those sort of regions where you think you might be able to get this delivered, I'd say please go check them out, because it really does support all our locals and local people a lot. And guys, stay tuned. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you had a lovely time. Look forward to, we're going to do this. We'll keep doing this every Saturday. So you might have some samples left in your bottles. So you're welcome to join us again next week, and they should be okay for that long. And guys, and thank you. Enjoy. I'm going to now, I haven't done this yet, but here, I'm going to turn off the video and leave on the, no samples left. Yeah. I sometimes have that problem too. I'm going to, if I can work it out, I'm going to turn off the video and the sound and leave the questions open for anyone asks questions. So thanks guys for joining us, and we'll see you again soon, I hope.